Good evening, Shalini. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you also. Thank you so much for coming on to the program. We've got about 85 participants already logged in. So I'm going to get started by just taking this opportunity to, first of all, thank you for coming in and accepting our invite. I hope you and your loved ones are safe during what are very difficult circumstances. So I'll spend a couple of minutes introducing you, Mr. Narayanan. It's my honor, privilege, and duty to make sure that I do that effectively. For the benefit of everybody, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'll give you the highlights of what is a very, very interesting career that Mr. Narayanan has had. He's got 35 years of exhaustive experience in this one industry, the FMCG industry, and has held very senior leadership positions across various companies. He's currently on the board of directors of Nestle India Limited since 1st of August 2015, prior to which he was chairman and CEO of Nestle Philippines before he joined Nestle India. He was also with Nestle in Singapore, during which time the business in Singapore witnessed sustained growth amidst the economic downturn. This was the 2008 to 2010 period. And he was awarded the Medal of Commendation by the government of Singapore for excellence in employee relations during this challenging period. I'm sure he'll have a lot to tell us about that. International experience continues. He moved to Nestle Egypt, and then I understand he's done roles in various parts of the geographies of where Nestle is present. Going back in time, he actually began his career as a management trainee with Hindustan Lever, where he held responsibilities of various kinds in sales, marketing, and general management. He's also worked in Colgate-Palmolive. Mr. Narayanan holds a master's degree in economics from the Delhi School of Economics and a diploma from the IMD Program of Executive Development. Has participated in various Nestle leadership programs, including the one from the London Business School. Mr. Narayanan is well known in the talk circles. He's spoken at NASSCOM, various corporates, NUS in Singapore, etc. He was also awarded the Forbes India Leadership Awards 2017 as the best CEO in the multinational category and recognized amongst the most valuable CEOs in 2019 by Business World. Mr. Narayanan, thank you very much. We'd like to hear from you on, how as a leader, what are the dimensions of this crisis that we're going through, and how do you kind of lead in this crisis? So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you very much, and it is a privilege and pleasure for me to join the Indian Women's Forum here at of CII, and it's a very very illustrious organization that I also am a member of, and I happen to be on the National Council as well. So it's something that I'm privileged to be on, and therefore I'm talking to fellow colleagues, and yes, you asked me to reflect on leadership at this time and in a crisis, and I just thought that I would share with you some perspectives, and these are perspectives that are kind of based on my own experience. So therefore, they are not out of any textbook, or they don't purport to be any treatise on the subject, but it is fundamentally the different trails and tribulations that one has been through in life, and also a reflection on probably the worst crisis that one has been through in one's lifetime. At least in my lifetime, I've not seen any event that is quite like the pandemic that has hit us, and especially what we are currently going through is probably the most difficult time. So really, if I were to reflect on crisis and leadership, and what is it that this pandemic has redefined for us, and I think we need to understand as human beings, whether you're a man or a woman, I think it hits you the same way, and there is no gender difference in the way in which this pandemic is affecting, except for, of course, some nuances of the workplace that could be different. The three essentials of our lives that have got completely upstaged by the pandemic. The first one is, we've all believed in a lot of self-confidence, in certainty, in predictability, I dare say invincibility. Amongst women, I must say that this quotient was a bit less, but certainly the hubris among men and the invincibility that men have tended to demonstrate over history has been very high. And I think this pandemic has been the grand equalizer. It has taken the rich, the poor, the endowed, the not so well endowed, the educated, the not so well educated, indeed the privileged and the not so privileged, and put them in the same bucket, and churned them up and given them the fate that the pandemic feels that you deserve. So therefore, I think certainty, predictability, and invincibility has been totally removed. Which means that this is, if you look at it positively, this is the time for humility. Because when you don't have invincibility, when you don't have predictability, when you don't have certainty, then you have to be a bit humble about the way you look at your own life and you look at the life of people around you. The second unfortunate fact is that the pandemic has heightened the fact that the meek shall not inherit the earth. The ones who have suffered have actually been the ones who are poor, the ones who are less privileged, the ones who are more helpless, and the ones who are less protected by the society, by the social system, by the economic system. And if you look at India itself, I think it's a classic example. We still don't know. We still don't know what is the depth of the economic woes that this country is facing or will face. We have no idea about the level of unemployment. We talk about 10 million, somebody says 120 million have been pushed into poverty. Somebody else says the urban unemployment is much higher than the rural unemployment. We have guesstimates, but we still don't know the extent of the pain. And when we will come out of it, we have absolutely no idea. I mean, I don't think anybody is now even hazarding to make a prediction of it. And I think the third thing, which is at a broad sense, has happened is that the pandemic has thrown businesses, societies, nations, leaderships in complete disarray. Those whom we held up with a candle as being outstanding epitomes of strength, leadership, maturity, and trustworthiness today stand fallen, and stand fallen quite badly in our eyes. I don't wish to allude to personalities and characters, but look around you and you see a ruin, a wreckage of failed leadership, failed opportunities, failed attempts at planning, failed attempts at predictions, failed attempts at recreating some of the fissures of society in order to help those who need help. So these three elements, in some sense, has completely destroyed. I say this in very sad terms. I do see hope at the end of it, because from the phoenix, from the ashes will rise a phoenix, and there will be a phoenix that one day comes about. But today, it is a wreckage. While I hope and pray that all of you are safe and your families are safe, I think each one of you, to whatever extent, has seen grief, has seen tragedy, has seen shock, has seen unhappiness, has seen people fall by the wayside who are young and who are happy and who are content and who are leading normal lives, felled by this pandemic in a few days, from living, breathing, to death and cremation. So I think it's a very, very difficult time for all of us. At this time, it is, I think, important to keep in mind a few essentials. And this is whether it is a large crisis or a small crisis, whether you have been personally affected by it more or less, that only your circumstance will tell. But today, what is becoming more and more important is a few essentials as a leader. And I know that on this call are distinguished leaders, people, women who run companies, who work in organizations, who have their own establishments, who are responsible for the lives of people who work for them, apart from the lives of people in their families, as wives, as mothers, as sisters. They play a role that is also extremely important in the extended community and in society. And there are a few things that, in my experience, I have found to be useful to reflect upon. I think the first element at this time is managing yourself. I think there is nothing more important than managing yourself, because you are bombarded. Every day you open the newspaper, you open the television channel, you open anything, any news item that comes to you, any media vector that you frequent, including social media. What do you see there? You see only death and destruction. You see obituaries. You see painful eulogies written to dead parents, to friends, to colleagues, to people who have been maimed very badly by this pandemic. And while you sympathize, while you empathize, just reflect on the fact that if you don't manage yourself, you are going to get yourself into a vortex of despair. And this vortex of despair will probably lead you to other complications in your own health and in your own psyche. And as slowly as it creeps in, a foreboding of depression, a foreboding of hopelessness can only make your already tenuous life even worse for you. So I think this is the time for you to manage yourself, which means go back to the values and to the purpose that you have defined for your life. Each of you has got a purpose in life. Nothing grandiose. Some of us have a simple purpose. My own purpose in life is, which I set out for myself when I was fairly young, was to make as much of positive impact that I can on people around me. That's all. I didn't want to enrich anybody. I didn't want to impoverish anybody. I didn't want to enrich myself. I didn't want to do anything that can be counted upon materially. But I said, if I can make a positive impact, a kind word, a kind thought, a help, a support, a friendly hand on the shoulder, if I could do all of that at some stage of my life, I would consider myself a blessed person. So go back to your values, go back to your purpose, go back to the meaning of what you are doing and what you stand for. And remember that if you're a leader, your people have no one else to look up to but you. They don't look up to political leaders. They don't look up to economic leaders. Their own family is in disarray. Their own parents are pained. Their uncles and aunts are pained. Whom do they look up to in an organization? They look up to the leader. And if the leader is quaking in his boots, if the leader is despondent, if the leader is helpless, then what happens to the plight of the hundreds and thousands of people who work for him or her? There is no hope. And therefore, as a leader, you have to swallow the difficulty of the moment. Hold on to the steering wheel with a steady hand. Clean your glasses. Look through the front mirror and look ahead in this dark, dreary night and try and drive the car that you have been given the responsibility for. So managing the self is more than half the problem. Many leaders fail to manage themselves. They become insecure. They become selfish. They look at safety from the point of view of I, me, myself, my immediate loved ones, my family. But in a crisis, you don't run a company, you serve a family. Your purpose of leadership today is a purpose of service. You've been paid all that you've been paid by your companies, rewarded, given accolades, given awards. All the awards that I have received amounts to nothing if I'm not able to stand by my people at this time. What is the use of those medals that adorn my shelf if I am not able to make myself worthy of service to the pained in my organization, in my extended community at this time? And therefore, please focus on managing yourself first. Get yourself under control before you start getting anybody else under control. The next is managing the team. And managing the team comes out of authenticity and trust. Mind the two words, authenticity. This is the time for empathy and compassion. This is not the time for crocodile tears. This is not the time for false emotions. This is not the time for pretense. This is not the time for game playing. This is the time for empathy and compassion. And as the Dalai Lama once said, compassion is the most pervasive emotion in human beings, and yet it is the least used. That is a tragedy. Because we see compassion as a sign of weakness. In the hubris of life, if somebody is kind to the other, we look at him and say that, look, this guy is a foolish fellow. He doesn't know, he's not smart enough. He's not clever enough. He's not that wild wolf on Wall Street who knows exactly what to grab when and how to make life richer, more bigger, more grandiose, and more colorful. This is a time when authenticity and compassion matter. This is the time when trust matters. Investment of decades that you have done in leading teams, in building your credibility, comes home to roost now. This is the time when you have to guide your people by the hand, and they have to trust you. It's like that little child who holds the hand of the mother. There is implicit trust in that. Child never believes that the mother is going to take him or her astray. It's the same with your team. You need to have their hand in yours and guide them, help them, support them. They have their own issues. As women, I know that you have a lot more responsibilities. You run families, you manage children, remote education, elderly parents, elderly in-laws, uncles, aunts, extended families. All the load comes on you, and yet when the jobs are lost, it is women who lose their jobs. That's the tragedy of the pandemic. More women have lost jobs in this pandemic than men have. And why is that the case? Because some is societal, that if there is to be a job that exists, let it go to the man, which is the typical patriarchy that has defined us for centuries. Or the other one is you give up. You say, I can't manage everything in life. It's impossible for me. I can't, I have two hands and I've got two legs and I've got one head. How much can I manage? How much can I do? And therefore, managing the team is going to be a very, very important part of whatever you're going to manage. And this is where authenticity and trust will be important. Managing the environment, you're all in a business. Your environment is collapsing around you. You have uncertainty at every corner. You have lockdowns, you have curfews, you have containment zones, you have areas, parts of the country which are locked down in front of your eyes, and you can't do anything about it. The environment is very harsh. People around are very harsh. They're going around with no solutions in sight. That means that you have to do a lot of your own advanced planning. You have to have a core team of people with you to help you plan the environment, to help you plan your steps. And here I give you a suggestion which I have used. I don't think of 2 years and 3 years and 5 years anymore. The pandemic has made it an existential. When I call up somebody and say, how are you doing today? It is, how are you doing today? I don't have the certainty of tomorrow. And let none of us have the arrogance that we will wake up tomorrow hale and hearty. We may or we may not. That's how the pandemic has challenged us. Shorter time spans, shorter horizons, planning for here and now, planning for maybe a week or maybe a month at best. But stop talking of 3-year plans, 5 years plan, what will happen in 2026. I don't think that's going to be very important today. So manage the environment as best as you can. Manage the business, which means focus on the essentials. One of the things that I'm extremely proud of, and that's probably because of the industry that I'm in, I'm extremely proud of the fact that I have not deprived a single person, I repeat, not a single person of a job in my company. Everyone has been paid their full salaries, their bonuses. In fact, to the extent that we've gone to take special insurance for our frontline against COVID. This is not an act of generosity. This is what it means to be human. So the one mandate that I gave my team members was cut every non-people cost that you can. Every non-people cost. People cost will remain non-people cost, travel, conferences, events, advertising, whatever else you're doing. Cut it, ruthlessly cut it. Because to keep the ship afloat, cash has to come in. If cash has to come in, then what is not important gets jettisoned and exited. So this part of the exercise, managing the business, has to be managed from the head and not from the heart. You have to be very clear. This is a head exercise. This is not a heart exercise. You can't get emotional about clinging to some of the heritage costs that you carry or the legacy costs that you carry. You have to jettison it with the interest. You know, when a ship is sinking in the sea, the ballasts are emptied of all the inessential items. That's how you manage a difficult situation. And that's what really you need to do at this time. So managing the business is also an extremely important step. And that will depend on the kind of business that you're in and the essentials of the business, the cash cycles, the customer cycles, the servicing aspects, the operating aspects. So those are things that you know best, and it's not for me to be telling you the nuance. All that I can suggest to you is manage your cash first, because cash is reality. Everything else is a dream. So manage your cash as best as you can. And last, manage what's next. What happens next? We will all come out of this pandemic. I'm confident of that. We will come out of it maimed. We'll come out of it sobered. We'll come out of it hopefully humbled, but we will come out of it. So what next? As a leader, start thinking. How should I manage the workplace? How should I manage the operating space? How should I manage the business? How should I manage the outcomes? How should I manage the competitiveness? These are all aspects that you need to manage today. I would like to suggest a few steps that you could take to take the next steps. The suggested part is what I call the 8 R's. First, reaction. I think it's important to measure what reaction you're going to have to whatever problem you're going to be faced with. Resolve. The ability, the determination, the attitude, the spirit to be able to resolve the action for the reaction to take place. The third, response. What is your short-term response? What is your longer-term response? Have a blueprint in mind. Have at least an idea in mind. You don't have to have certainty, but you should at least have some blueprint in your mind of where the response will be. Resilience. This is the time to appeal to resilience and to the spirit and culture of your organization. This is the time, my colleagues, you will need to invoke the single most important aspect of any company, which is the most underrepresented, the most considered to be something that you give the least amount of attention to. And yet today it becomes the most important, and that is culture. You can have the greatest factories, you can have the greatest workplaces, you can have the greatest offices, the greatest furniture, the greatest conference rooms. And yet, if you don't have culture, which is the unspoken language of the organization, you will not succeed. And in difficult times, you will fail. Because a culture is that unspoken language. When everybody is empowered to do exactly what they feel like, it is culture that brings them together to act in unison. This is why a salesman of Nestle walks for 3 days, 14 kilometers each day in Sikkim to get the permission to start the distribution of the products of the company. This is why a sales executive in Hosur takes the stocks in his own car and distributes it shop to shop so that essential items are distributed. This is why somebody drives down with an essential product of the company in post-operative care from Ahmedabad to Indore to save the life of a child, because a child would have died in post-operative care if this product of Nestle had not been given. You think I told them this? No, I didn't. I didn't even know that these incidents were happening. I got to know it afterwards. What made them do this? It's culture. If companies invest more in culture and less in capex, we will have a lot more successful companies. So focus at this time on culture. If you haven't built a culture, it's too late in the pandemic to build a culture. But if you intend to build one, because that is going to outlast you and outlast all the greatness of your companies. Cultures. The reason why a company like Nestle is 155 years old is because of the culture sown, the seeds of which were sown by Henri Nestle, the founder, where empathy, respect, quality, and safety were defined as the operating goals of the company. That is all that we were to do, and that is all that we have been doing. So, build resilience. Look at this opportunity to recalibrate your business. Look at this opportunity to redirect your business, to renew your business in terms of what are the new aspects, new business models, new opportunities that you see. And finally, define the resurgence of the company. How do you research and how do you take the company forward for the next 5-10 years? So reaction, resolve, response, resilience, recalibration, redirection, renewal, and resurgence. These is what I would believe would be important as you take the journey forward. What are a few essential truths that I have learned from experience in difficult situations? Number one, kindness, authenticity, compassion, pragmatism. That's all I've believed in. Kindness comes first, authenticity and compassion, and pragmatism. We all come in life with nothing, we will go with nothing. The pandemic has made that even more apparent to us. The richest men, the richest women, the most well-endowed people in life have gone in a jiffy. They never expected it. They came with nothing, they will go with nothing. What you will be remembered by is the deeds and how you made the other man feel. Use this as an opportunity to make the other man or other woman feel better in very painful times. Second, sustainable kindness needs robust culture and purpose. If you have to institutionalize kindness and good heart within the company, you have to build the culture of the company. There is nothing wrong in being kind and being demanding on performance. I have tried to practice a career where I have been demanding on performance. Nobody who's worked for me will ever say that Suresh is lax on performance. I don't allow performance to suffer. I run a high-performing company. I've run it for a while now. But where I allow myself to melt is in the altar of kindness and reaching out. Because that is to be human. And that, in my context of my organization, works because the culture of the company is respect and dignity and kindness. These are institutionalized, and therefore it is important to have this as part of your organization. Third, you need to have started before the pandemic and enabled diverse leaderships to take over. Start looking at culture, dear colleagues. Start looking at building values in your organization. Start looking at building purpose in your organization. These are not idle terms. This is what has moved mankind. Unfortunately, because all of us go to business schools and all of us go to a very quantitative and a very measurable way of looking at life, we forget some of these things. We think these are grandmother stories. But look back on your life, your greatest values have been taught to you by your mother and by your grandmother. And that is what lasts all through your life. As you get older, I remember some of my older relatives. I remember my grandparents. I remember my parents more than I remember anybody else. And that's because they are the ones who gave you the values and purpose in your life. Build that back in your organization, and you'll find that it is a much better way to live and to work. Kindness is viral when the humblest employee demonstrates it. In an organization, kindness is when the gatekeeper, when the security guard shows kindness towards somebody coming in the organization and helps them. It is not when the CEO or the CHRO is repeating it. That is cosmetic. The real is when someone within the organization who's humble, whose official status is not that of being across the table in a large boardroom, when he exhibits kindness, you know that kindness has become viral. And that's what you need to do in today's current context. From today and for years to come, it will be kindness, empathy, and compassion that will move organizations. We have all been maimed, we have all been, in a sense, tortured by the pain of this pandemic. What we need today is a lot of empathy, kindness, and reaching out. The post-pandemic world will have people who might not have been physically maimed by the virus and yet would have been mentally and emotionally scarred for a long, long time. They need to be taken care of. And the only balm of kindness and compassion can help, and understanding can help. Nothing else. You can't throw money at them. You can't throw them into dungeons and say, now retrieve yourself before you come back to life. The next, leadership is not leading others, but trusting yourself. We all think that leadership is the task of leading others. Reflect on it carefully. You are able to lead others only when you trust yourself. So build the skills, get the immunity, get the resilience, get the resolve, get the passion, get the commitment to trust yourself. Because when you trust yourself, you will trust yourself to not only lead yourself, but also lead others. And that is why leadership is not leading others, but trusting yourself. And finally, enablement, energizing, and empowerment will be the future mantras. For long, we have had management cultures where the boss called the shots. Everything was decided by the boss. What you eat, what you drink, cafeteria food, what you have as products for the company, services, who gets promoted, who gets demoted, who gets 5%, who gets 20% increment is all decided by a boss. The pandemic has said, throw the boss at the wayside. Start looking at individuals, because you are no longer breathing down the neck. All of us used to go at 9 o'clock to the office or 8 o'clock to the office. We used to see the boss. The boss used to tell us what is good and what is bad, and that's how we led life. Today, the boss is far away. He's feeling frustrated because he can't control you. He doesn't know. Maybe he calls you up at 10 o'clock and then he finds you eating breakfast, right? He doesn't expect it. Earlier, he would have called you and you would have been in his room. So, this is the golden opportunity that the pandemic has thrown. Enabling your people, empowering your people, and energizing your people. This young generation, the Generation Z as it were, is going to demand all of this. They don't like work cultures which are stifling. They don't like work cultures which are hierarchical. They don't like work cultures where their ideas are thrown aside. And all that we look at is my idea, my brief, my company, my results, my bonus, my salary, and my benefit. I think there will be positives coming out of this pandemic. Every crisis brings an opportunity in its wake. It has been said in the Chinese language, and it is true. Crisis and opportunity is the same word in Chinese. And I think it's important for us to reflect on this, that the pandemic might have left us with a lot of pain, and yet it will probably create a generation of the most empathetic and compassionate leaders for the world. I thank you all very much for your attention and for your time today. And I believe we have another 15-20 minutes more. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Shalini, if people have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really very useful. You could see a lot of people making notes, some in the chat box, some elsewhere. So we do have a few questions. Some of them may come up in the chat box, but we did take some questions offline also. So I'll get started off with a few questions, and we'll take it forward from there. I think one of the challenges most of us have faced, and I have personally faced it as well as others, is, and you alluded to it, you don't see your team members, right? I haven't met a lot of my team members in a long time, for the last 12 to 14 months, some new, some. As a leader, how do you kind of keep the team motivation up, and how do you build common purpose? How do you make it cohesive when you literally, seeing each other on a video, sometimes videos are off, whatever it is. So, any thoughts around just keeping them motivated and building cohesion?
I think it is a very important question, Shalini, that you ask, and there are no magic bullets in this, unfortunately. I've tried to work with 2 or 3 things that I hope work for me, and I hope it works for others as well. Number one is to keep a telephonic contact with key members of my team, of my immediate operating team, as also certain other key members of the organization that you were in touch with when you were in the office. So there are a few people that you chat with them either in the water cooler, or you talk to them in the boardroom, or you talk to them wherever, right, in the lunchroom, cafeteria, wherever. So I think it's important to keep a personal touch. I'm still an old school man. I'm not a social media person. So therefore, I have to pick up the phone and talk to people. So I do that reasonably often with my people. The second is that I've used technology, things like chorus calls and others, to actually talk to my people. I don't have a set agenda for it. In fact, the last couple of times, it has been about managing yourself and about managing your emotions. I've not talked about business. I've not talked about how much we are growing and how much we are doing on various matrices, because I find it a little insensitive at this time. When people are running around to find oxygen cylinders and beds and ICUs, and then you start talking to them about why is your profit target come down, or why is your sales target down. I think it's very, 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 very insensitive. I find it very crude, and I can't get myself to do it. So therefore, I do have talks with them, communication with them. I call for questions. What are the kind of themes that you would like to talk about? Also, I'm very interested in the company on a lot of wellness initiatives that we have taken as an organization. Physical wellness and of course mental wellness. We have quite a few programs that have been on for the last 14 months already, alluding to mental health of people, emotional balances, stresses, various other things. There are a number of youngsters who joined the company who feel lost because they haven't met a soul. They work at Nestle, but they're very proud of working at Nestle, but they don't know anybody, right? I try and talk to them, so I get them on the video, and some of them, I just chat with them and make them feel comfortable and say, look, for whatever it's worth, this is the man who heads the company, so at least you put a video frame to a face, right? And at least do that much. So I think these are the ways in which one has tried to keep in touch and use your team to keep sensing what are the issues that are coming up. And as we go through the pandemic, there are different issues that come up: personal issues, emotional issues, workplace issues, boss and management styles. We've had to do a lot of intervention there because some bosses are very closeted. They like their team with them all the time, literally breathing down the neck. And sometimes it becomes, the work becomes very stifling. So we have set simple rules. Saturday, Sunday, you won't have meetings. No meetings after 6 p.m. in the evening. We had said this earlier itself, in my company, because I found some women leave the office very late. And I asked them, why do you leave late? They said, sir, we had a meeting till 7. I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, when will they go home? When will they spend time with the family? So we said, after 6 o'clock, no meetings will be held. And I myself am strict about it. I don't hold any meetings after 6. I might have meetings with Switzerland. That's a different matter altogether. That's my problem. It's not a problem with my team. So I think there are different ways in which one can be in touch. It is not perfect, but at least it's better than radio silence.
Thank you. I think that's useful. Keeping the connection going is very useful. The other thing is, I mean, while reading your resume, I understand you were in Singapore during 2008 when there was a financial crisis. As a banker, we keep facing this issue, and I've been a banker all my life. We lived through trauma during 2008 to 2010. It was a financial crisis, but I do believe these two are very, very different. And I've kind of said that in internal sessions. So I just wanted to get your perspective on what are some of the kind of contrasts between the two crises, and are there any kind of common learnings between the two crises that Nestle as an organization went through and you personally went through?
Look, I think the crises are very different at three levels. I think one level was that that the aftermath of the financial meltdown took a while to build up. It was not that everything came crashing down. It went in waves and it built from west to east, as it were, and it first hurt the richest and then started to hurt the poorest. This crisis has hurt rich and poor really hard, and it has made no distinction between that. Number two was the financial crisis was more a crisis of managing your expectations between what you were earning and what you were capable of spending over a period of time, because the whole financial asset model melted down, and because of that, you had economic issues across the world that really impacted incomes, expectations of incomes for the future, and therefore, expenditure patterns, whether it is real estate or other financial instruments and stuff like that. This time around, it is a economic meltdown period. It's no country in this world can say that we have not had an economic meltdown. It has affected all across all strata. The financial crisis began by affecting the rich more than the poor. This time around, the poor have got affected far more than anybody else. I think the rich have become richer in this crisis. The poor have become even poorer and more destitute in this crisis. And the third and the biggest difference between the two crises was the financial crisis was not an existential crisis. It was not a question of life and death. You could have been a banker on Wall Street, or you could have been a relatively modest person in Mumbai, and you would have had two different worlds in which you would have operated. Now the world has been taken over by the pandemic. So the pandemic says, I will finish off the rich and the poor with equal ferocity. And I think that existential crisis will redefine the way in which society will come out of this. I think society changed after the financial meltdown. It changed in some areas for the better, some areas for the worst. This will probably redefine politics, economics, leadership, society, haves and the have-nots, and economic inequality. I would think a lot more definitively than what would have happened in the earlier crisis. So I think to that extent, these are very different, and therefore the reactions from companies were different. At that time, we hunkered down and tried to optimize our cost structures in order to manage the budgets and manage the portfolio of the company. This time around, we have done the same, except that we have ensured that the people part of the equation, we try and keep it as watertight as possible. And I think that's probably one of the big differences between that crisis and this crisis.
True. I mean, just taking that trend of thought, I think, I mean, this is a pervasive one, you know, the pandemic, etc. But in Nestle, all of us remember the fact that my favorite product went off the shelf for some time, Maggie. You know, I must admit I'm a big fan of that product. You know, so it did, and that was something where you were all alone as an organization. And you know, it was literally this. At least you've got company, right? Everybody else is going through it. Any learnings from that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shalini. Thank you for being a fan of Maggie. I think there are, fortunately, I'm blessed to have millions of fans of Maggie. And now the pandemic, actually, it's ironically, the brand that was vilified 5 years ago is now the most sought after.
Also the most loved brand, yeah.
Yeah, so it is. It is. No, I think that was a very different. That was, we were alone. We were alone. Uh, we were we were vilified. We were criticized. We were accused. Uh, and I think that was a situation where it was a perfect storm, where nothing else was happening. There was no demonetization. There was no GST. There was no no riots, and there was no nothing happening. No CA, no NRC, nothing. It was just this one event that happened, and it kept hogging the headlines for a long time. And it is actually, in the economic consequences for the country, very small. So it's a brand, and a couple of thousand tons here and there, and a couple of million people involved with it. But it's nothing more than that. So I think that was a different one. That was an existential crisis of a kind where purpose, values, actions, and and trust was touched at its core. And I think that is really what we tried to do there. In a sense, uh, the Maggie crisis was a kind of precursor to the pandemic. It was the dress rehearsal for the pandemic, in terms of building some of the values and building some of the purpose and the ways in which we work as an organization. And I think that's what we managed to get right during that period. And that's really what uh, became of use to us during this period as well.
There's one question in the chat box which is around kindness, and I think you've spoken about kindness so eloquently through the earlier part of the session. But the question really is this something that Nestle identified during the pandemic, or is it something that you've already embedded in? It's a 150-year organization. So can you give us throw some light on how this whole kindness theme, which is a very active,
Look, I think
about?
it's a bit of a culture thing. If you look at Shalini, our history, we Henri Nestle, who started this company in 1865, was a was a was a serial entrepreneur, and he had a record of some successful but many failed businesses. But he was a kind-hearted man, and he was in Switzerland in the 19th century, which was, surprise, surprise, a poor country, and child mortality was very high. So he said, I have to, one of the causes he took was to save the lives of children. And he said, look, I find too many children dying, and what can I do? And he was a trained pharmacist. So he put together a product that consisted of wheat flour, milk, sugar, vitamins, and gave it to the child of a neighbor. Uh, Child's name was Werner, and Werner survived. And he gave it to many other children, and they all survived because it was basically malnutrition that was killing them. And till the persons in the village, they told him that, look, Henri, why don't you set up a business that, in fact, uh, takes on the task of saving children in nutrition. And that's exactly what he did. He called it Farin Lakti, and he called it Nestle. He's one of the first people to put his name to it. And even the coat of arms, the bird and the two chicks. In his time, it was bird and three chicks is what he put, and then somebody must have decided family planning. Three is too much, make it two. So that's what was done. It was digitized, but the coat of arms still remains the same. And he said, look, whatever I produce and sell will be for the family, and that was the spirit that he took on. But what became a mission to save the lives of children started the journey of this company. And he said, because I'm talking about the relationship, the closest relationship known to mankind between a mother and child, I will produce products that are also the safest and the most secure as far as children are concerned. And that product that he produced, which is called farine lacti, which is French for wheat flour and milk, still exists. It's called Cerelac. So Cerelac was the first product of the company. And I think in a sense, he embedded the quality, safety, and kindness as part of he never said it in those words, but it became the kind of DNA for the company. And that DNA has continued for 155, 156 years today. And that's how I think respect and decency and kindness have become part of the company. Also, because the company draws less than 2% of its turnover from Switzerland. 98% of its turnover comes from 200 other countries. So therefore, we are a truly transnational company, respecting gender and cultural diversity as part of who we are. And you cannot be a gender diverse and a ethnically diverse company unless you have respect and kindness as part of your DNA. So I think to a certain extent, this has got built up. And therefore, as we work across, and I've had the privilege of working across different Nestle offices in the world, the office building might be different, but the culture inside is the same. And I think that's what I believe builds for companies with longevity. It's like families. Some families, Shalini, are more illustrious than others, and you look back, and you'll always find that it is values. It is not wealth. It is values. Somewhere, somebody, some grandfather, some grandmother, some aunt has planted the right seeds of values in the children, and that's what makes them great citizens. And that's, I think, it's the same with organizations.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, if it's possible, I'll take one more question from the panel. And I think this has resonated well with the team. Your point that, meetings after 6 o'clock, and that's whether you're a lady or a man, I think it's important to kind of draw some of those boundaries. But I'm also then referring to the fact that, and you said it, that, performance is paramount, right? I mean, we're not here to think it's a performance culture. It's something that you need to think. The output's got to be there. So how do you bring about that balance in your workforce, with particular reference to, I must say, women, but how do you bring about this balance between work-life, the much bandied topic, I know, but, 6 o'clock meetings is great, but what if there is an output, and how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think, firstly, Shalini, I believe that, this work-life is really an equation that has to be managed with the values and purpose of the individual. I mean, it's very, people keep saying, my work life is ruined, my work life is ruined. You almost externalize it. I think the time has come for all of us to start internalizing it. I mean, and the pandemic has been a classic example, has been a classic platform where work lives have got questioned. Some of us have managed it better than others. Some others have been worse. Because of the kind of importance that we have given to either one. So there is no work, there is no life, right? All of us, many of us belong to middle class backgrounds, so we don't have enormous wealth to give us a comfortable life. We have to earn it. And I've always believed that, a work ethic and a ambition is important. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong in having ambition. There is nothing wrong in having a sense of achievement. There is nothing wrong in setting for yourself certain goals and targets that you want to achieve. I think there's nothing wrong in it, and that's what commercial organizations are for. I mean, you work at a bank, I work at Nestle. I think our organizations survive and thrive because of a profit motive and a turnover generation. Profit not from from an unethical sense of greed. But if you have to grow, you need some surplus at the end of it all. That's all. That's all that is being talked about. So I think I've always kept that as a defined objective that people have, and therefore that is something that is non-bargainable when you join an organization. If you join an organization and say, I'm not interested in achieving, I'm not interested in the goals of this company, then I don't think you should be working in that company. So to that extent, I think there is I attach a certain amount of importance to it. I attach a certain amount of pride and achievement orientation to it. But at the same time, I think when you're talking about kindness and compassion, you're talking about the means that you use to the end of the goals that you talk about. So decency, respect, professionalism, empowerment, enablement are all tools that you use in order to achieve the results. And I think these necessarily mean that you have to work harder at them. These are not easy things to remedy. It's much easier to bark insultingly at somebody and try and get fear to act on them and for them to act, but it's not sustainable. It's not something that will get you longevity of the relationship and of results. So therefore, to that extent, I think having both is fully compatible with successful companies. And in fact, having just one or the other leads to a detriment. And more often than not, you'll find, you will notice it, Shalini, that great organizations do not trip on lousy strategies. They trip on poor execution. And if you trace poor execution, you'll find poor leadership. Even today, if you look at the pandemic, which are the countries that have handled it brilliantly? Which are the countries that have handled it not so well? The quotient that has defined it is leadership. It's leadership. I mean, you can blame everything up and down, but if leadership doesn't work, there is nothing that can make an organization successful.
Thank you. I think on that note, it's been an extremely engrossing 1 hour. Taken away a lot of tips, your 8 R's, your steps, and the overemphasizing the whole authenticity, kindness, compassion piece is absolutely bang on. And I think all of us have a lot to learn from that. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for spending this hour with us. The team's gained a lot from that. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of internal debates and discussions around this thereafter. Thank you.